Welcome to another edition of Jackman Radio. I'm your host, Mike Jackman. As always, joined by my twin and partner in crime, Mr. Eric Jackman. And we are delighted tonight to be joined by author, Mr. Ken McCarthy. And he has published an amazing book called JFK and RFK's Secret Battle Against Zionist Extremism, the documentary evidence. So we're going to get right into it. How you doing today, Ken?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Doing well. Thanks for your time and for joining us tonight.
That's great. Great to have you on. And I was saying before we were rolling, Ken kind of came into my periph and my focus when I saw him on an appearance with another fellow geopolitical podcaster, researcher, and just all around a good guy, Aaron Good, had you on his show. And he, obviously is very deep into the weeds about both all the big assassinations really of the 60s and foreign policy. And obviously he's kind of been more open to this angle of Israeli involvement and Zionist involvement in the murder of not only JFK, but RFK. And then, of course, the subsequent cover-up and handling of that. So really just wanted to bring you on and hear kind of how you got into this and what your foray was into the world of assassination research and what was really like kind of the first light bulb moment where you realized that, there was Israeli involvement and how that's played out for you.
Well, I'm going to say this. If I were an official investigator, I would consider the Israeli government, supporters of the Zionist project, suspects. I can't say they did it because we haven't had a court case. But I will say, boy, if I were looking for suspects, they'd be on that list, along with the mob, along with the Cubans, and it's interesting. People bring out this big laundry list: the Cubans, the mob, the French have been accused, of being involved too. The CIA, the Texans, the oil men. I mean, it's this long list of people, and until recently, nobody ever wants to put the Zionist extremists, the radical Zionists, on the list. And as I was saying to you, when I did this book, I thought, well, I'm 66. I've had a nice long life. Someone's got to put this down. Now, I realize I'm not the only person that's spoken or written on this. There was another fellow, Piper, I believe. Do I have his name right?
Yeah, Michael Collins Piper.
Yeah, who's no longer among the living, So, but apparently, and you mentioned this too before we started recording, that this is no longer a forbidden topic. You can actually suggest that when you're making a list of who had very serious motives and means to kill the Kennedy brothers, both of them, radical Zionists are definitely on that list.
Yeah.
And it's wild to me too, Ken, because I have been looking into the assassination since I was a young boy, probably honestly 12 or 13 years old. My uncle gave me a copy of Fletcher Prouty's book, JFK, and I kind of started there, and I watched the Men Who Killed Kennedy series from the British, and Nigel Turner, I think it was, did that. But, Israel doesn't come up in any of that, really. And there's just a scant mention in Oliver Stone's JFK, I believe, about Permindex, which if you peel back a couple layers on Permindex, you get to Clay Shaw, you get to some of the connected mobsters and the Zionist extremists that you mentioned. But it was really an underground thing for a long time. And the narrative control they've had over this thing, where even in conspiracy research circles, it was something that was in hushed tones. And you mentioned, Piper, Michael Collins Piper. I think his book, Final Judgment, I think it was called, the first edition came out in probably the early to mid 90s. And it was basically banned. And it was just not a popular thing at all. And it was really suppressed and become aware of potential Zionist involvement or the motives for why they might be involved and have the means to cover it up and kind of run the narrative for the last 62 years this November.
Yeah. Well, to start way back, like you, I came across a book when I was very young, and I might have been 12 or something, 11. And I remember reading it late at night, and the hair on the back of my neck rose when I realized, oh my God, it didn't happen the way they said, and so that was a formative experience in my life. I was always curious as to why, of all the people that they fingered as the patsy as the murder of Robert Kennedy, why they used a Palestinian. Because it was obvious to me he was a patsy as soon as I became an adult and could think straight. Because one thing I know is you can't shoot somebody in the back of the head at close range when you're standing 5 feet in front of them. There's nobody that can do that. Jason Bourne can't do that. Maybe what's that cartoon character who could make his arms get long, but it can't happen in real life.
Inspector Gadget.
Yeah, right. So I thought, well, I've known about MK Ultra for a long time, because MK Ultra absolutely plays a role in both assassinations, really, but especially in the Robert Kennedy assassination. And so I knew that the thing's been around. I know how it works. I'm a scholar of that stuff. And I know they have a stable of people. It's not like they just say, hey, we need someone tomorrow. Let's go grab somebody off the street. They probably got, I don't know, 50, 100, 200 people wandering around right now who they can guide into a place as needed. I mean, I'm sure that fellow in Utah, he's almost certainly some guy who they had him on a chain, and they needed him for something, and they set him up. So I think about this. Palestinians are a very, very, very small percentage of the American population, Palestinian Americans. I mean, even today, but back then it was really small. So what are the odds that it would be a Palestinian in the first place? Of course, they created a narrative. We'll talk about that in a second. But if you think in terms of inventory and the fact you've got to prepare these people sometimes over years, you've got to prepare and manage them over years, very expensive process. Why did they pick a Palestinian? So that was a tell. That was a very big tell. And then the other thing that always I found amusing about the narrative is they found in Sirhan's pocket a news clipping of Kennedy saying he supported the missiles going to Israel, which every other politician did as well. It was no strange thing. Think about the quality of news, and it was a month-old article, right? Think about the quality of newsprint. And the listeners can do this. Cut out a thing from the newspaper, put it in your pocket, and walk around for a month. See how long it lasts, right? But he had a pristine copy of this in his pocket. So it looked a lot like a setup to me. So from that, I said, well, who would want to make it appear that the Palestinians were murderers of our presidential hopeful? Well, we know who that would be, And then when I started to learn about James Angleton and James Angleton's history, that is the most mind-boggling story of all. Your listeners may already know this, so if I'm saying stuff they already know, forgive me. He has not one but two to him in Israel. He's an American citizen, by the way, for people that don't know who he is. He was head of counterintelligence, and I'll explain what counterintelligence is a little bit later, because it's very important. So how many Americans, are there any Americans who have two memorials to themselves in Israel? And apparently at his funeral, everybody came out, every former Mossad head, every IDF head, they all came out. And it was stated that he was the biggest Zionist in America. And I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. We have a patsy who was picked, a Palestinian, and then we have the guy who was head of counterintelligence for the CIA during both assassinations, having a ridiculously close relationship with Israel. And then I found out, well, he didn't just have a nice relationship with them. He was actually one of the founding contributors to the formation of the Mossad. He hosted the head of the Mossad, and they talk shop. And as time went on, I realized, oh, I get it. So it's the way this was done. So you have the CIA, which is a nefarious organization to begin with. And then within the CIA, you have the Office of Counterintelligence. And he was given ridiculous amounts of leeway. Like, he could run his own shop. He could maintain his own filing system that was not connected to the CIA. This is unprecedented. He could run his own operations. He could run his own agents. This is not normal. And I have a memo that was, released and it had been redacted until I think 1998. And the thing that they redacted was in our liaison with Mr. Angleton, which is bizarre because he's an employee of the CIA. Why would you need to liaison with an employee of the agency? We've done this and that, and we keep track, sort of, the thing that was redacted originally is no longer redacted. There was a line that said, it basically said, including his working with and use of agents of the Israeli nation, right? So if you think about deniability, you would, if you're an intelligence agency and you want to wield more power than you're legally entitled to, you'd want to have a department that's allowed to kind of do whatever it wants and doesn't file its papers with the rest of the agency. And then within that, you'd want relationships with other intelligence agencies that man controls. So if you need a hitman to do something nefarious, you don't use one of our people. You use somebody from another country, and you use it through these various layers of deniability. So the thing about Angleton that's so fascinating is if you go to Google, I did this a while ago, I don't know if it's still true, and you ask who is the current head of counterintelligence for the CIA, you will not get an answer. The person that occupies that office right now, that is he does it secretly, anonymously. Now, people obviously in the government who are supposed to know, but you can't just like look it up and know who it is. That was also the case when Angleton was head of counterintelligence. So not only did he have his own wing of the CIA where he could do whatever he wanted and not report what he was doing, he was also not known. Now, he wasn't interviewed for the Kennedy assassination, the famous hearings. I'm drawing a blank. The
Warren Commission.
The Warren Commission, right? You notice he was never interviewed. Well, because he didn't exist.
Interesting.
Right. In 1964, when they were doing that, you got to figure that Dulles had his hands all over that and was probably reporting back to someone like Angleton, but his name never came up because it wasn't known until when did it even become known? I don't even.
Well, when they had the House Committee on Assassinations much later,
In the 70s.
Then he was asked to come forward and speak. It might have been after he resigned or before, but he was not. It's amazingly this man that wielded such extraordinary levels of power within the CIA was not a known figure. So much he wasn't even asked to speak, which was very convenient because he had a lot of connections to things related to the assassination. One of Angleton's jobs was to be the cover-up man. And you're gonna have to forgive me. I forget names very quickly, but there was a woman who had been JFK's alleged to be his girlfriend, and she was murdered in Georgetown and very publicly for no apparent reason. And that woman was married to a high-level CIA officer who was a colleague of Angleton. And that man said that Angleton personally went into his ex-wife, they'd been divorced, ex-wife's apartment and stole her diary. He did it personally, right? There was another fellow who had been station chief in Mexico City, right? So there's all these different countries, and we've got CIA guy running an office in every country. That's the station chief.
Win Scott.
Yeah. So he had retired, and was writing a memoir, and I guess was making some noises. So when he died, Angleton personally got on a plane, flew from Washington, D.C. to Mexico City, and browbeat his wife into being allowed to go into his office and remove everything that Angleton wanted, which included all the different versions of the memoir. So he was, when you say he coordinated the cover-up, he didn't leave anything to chance.
He afraid to get his hands dirty.
Yeah, he was literally banging down the door. Yeah, that was Cord Meyer and Mary Pinchot Meyer.
There you go.
And that was Mary's Mosaic, was the really good book written by Peter Janney about that, who was a CIA brat. His dad was Wistar Janney and grew up with the Meyer family.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's like, imagine if the CEO of U.S. Steel decided that he personally was going to go down to the factory and turn on the furnace.
Yeah.
Then there's something really important about that furnace, because he ain't leaving it to chance. So he was clearly the cover-up man. Yeah, please go ahead.
So with Angleton, did any of your research indicate that he was Oswald as far back as 59 in a separate envelope or separate folder?
Well, that's
or a separate 201 file or something like that?
Well, that's known now. That is now known. I think he was tracking Oswald since 59. And the other tell for me that we have to look at the Zionist extremists who are in control of the state of Israel right now. The reason we have to look at them is the man that he tasked with the job of tracking Oswald way back when and reading all his mail. I think his last name was Efren, and Efren posed at, and maybe even was a trade attorney who specialized supposedly in trade between Israel and the United States, which meant he had an office in Tel Aviv and he was flying back and forth constantly between Tel Aviv and Washington, D.C. And that's the person. And by the way, his name was kept secret until I believe about 5 years ago or something.
Yeah,
I mean,
Reuben Efren. Yeah.
Reuben Efren. So it's you can tell what the story is when you know what the lies are, right? So why bother to cover up the fact that this Israeli American who was traveling back and forth between Israel and Tel Aviv all the time was the person tasked with tracking Oswald starting in 1959? Why hide his identity and nationality? Right. Well, this memo that I have, which is not in the book, but I found it later, that's another example of where they were happy to release all kinds of stuff, but they wanted to redact the "and our friends in Israel" part, right? So that sort of tells you what they were nervous about.
They did a great job for so many years too, Ken, covering that up and just making people talk about the Cubans, talk about the mob, talk about the CIA, and every single CBS and ABC and NBC official story, propaganda that comes out every year on the anniversary just mockingly mentions that. And there was one that just came out that was utterly atrocious. They had a friggin' social media influencer on there talking about it. He looked like he had just, learned about it like the week before. So
right, he's reading it off a teleprompter.
Yeah, exactly. He's like the influencers now who are getting paid $7,000 per post by Netanyahu to make Israel look good, and it just shows you, man, the power of the media, though, like to even from researchers, and that stigma and that fear of talking about Israel. And to kind of go into some more of your work and how things were being hidden or compartmentalized, even when RFK was Attorney General and he tried to get them to lobby as a foreign agent, the powers that be put that into like a separate like folder or something, or they said they don't have to lobby. Like what was the story on that? Because I know that's one of the 4 or more tenets of your work about what the things that Kennedy was concerned about with Israel.
Yeah, the book revolves around two facts, and the fact you're referring to is in the summer of 1963, Robert Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's brother, and the Attorney General was attempting to enforce U.S. law vis-a-vis Israel and its lobbying activities, and they were not having it. And they were, making excuses and delaying, and we can't, it's not convenient right now, and this and that, and it was going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth.
And that was the American Zionist Council that later became AIPAC?
That group morphed into AIPAC.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, not at all. And so what people need to know about that law is the U.S. permits agents of foreign nations to lobby in the United States. However, they say we need to know who you are. We need to know where your money's coming from. We need to know how you're spending your money. We need to know who you are meeting with. And I believe it's so strict that theoretically, if you meet with 2 or more people to advance the cause of the country for whom you're being paid to advance, you have to report the details of the meeting to the State Department. I mean, it's not that law is broken all the time, but generally people, follow it. They register at least, right? I mean, Canada registers, New Zealand registers, but Israel didn't want to register. And after the Kennedys were murdered, after John F. Kennedy was murdered, Israel they haven't registered anything from what we can tell.
FARA, Foreign Agents Registry Act. Yeah,
and that was created by Roosevelt, ironically, in reaction to Nazi propaganda. The Nazis were hiring lots of propagandists to roam around the United States, burnishing their image, trying to make them look good, right? And there was, I forget. Oh yeah, it was Ivy Lee. I believe I could have this wrong, but a very famous PR person got dragged into that. One of the Rockefeller's PR people, and Roosevelt said, "Oh, wait a minute, we got to have a law here, guys." And so they put the law in place. So who's the one country that violates it? It's Israel,
right?
And of course, yep.
And right now in Congress, we only have Marjorie Taylor Greene, Ro Khanna, Tom Massey, maybe Rand Paul a little bit. They're the only ones who were mentioning it. Have the balls and the guile, and ironically, those are the ones who wanted all the Epstein files out.
Yeah, fancy that. So when John F. Kennedy was killed, that neutered Robert Kennedy, and people talk about. There are books about Lyndon Johnson and how he was really a gangster and a criminal, which is absolutely true. But what's not mentioned is that he came from a Christian Zionist family. He had an aunt who was like the head of the local chapter of the Christian Zionist organization. So he was very influenced. You mentioned earlier, Mike, that your uncle lent you a book, and that had a big influence on you as a young child. Well, had an influence on young Lyndon. And then he had a lot of people in his circle who were ardent Zionists. And he also had a relationship, and again, sorry, I don't have the name handy, but there was a Swiss woman who married an Israeli, and she actually joined the Irgun during I guess maybe before 40. I'm not exactly sure, but she was involved in gun smuggling, right? She was involved in illegal activities related to arms on behalf of Israel. And she and her husband became big friends. Her husband was a Hollywood guy, and I think either owned a studio or ran a studio. And they became donors to the Kennedys. They don't, in fact, the one place that there's a picture of Marilyn Monroe and John F. Kennedy at the same time in the same place is at a party at their apartment in New York City. But in any event, he gave money to everybody, and he gave money to Kennedy, but he really gave a lot of money to Johnson, and they were very close. They actually went out and built a house near Johnson's ranch, and Johnson used to fly the presidential helicopter to go visit their ranch. They also stayed in the yacht. Apparently, there was even a bedroom that was, quote, their bedroom, the couple's bedroom. So Johnson was, I know, right? It's quite close. But there are people that have that kind of relationship with presidents. And I don't know if this is true. I have to really track this down. But apparently, during the attack on the USS Liberty, this woman, and I'm sorry, again, I really should have a cast list in front of me whenever I do an interview, but people can find who it is just by doing some Googling. Apparently, she provided him with ideas on what to say related to the murder, cold-blooded murder of U.S. sailors in 1977 in the U.S. Liberty. She was in the area, was in communication with him. So he was very Zionist friendly.
Oh, yeah. He basically he went soft on them after when they were supposed to do, I think your work shows that Kennedy said to the new prime minister that came in, Lee Eshkol, after Ben Gurion, he said, well, congratulations on your win, but getting right to this thing, I'm very worried about Dimona. We want to look at stuff. So December, we're gonna do this thing in December, even though he was trying for earlier. Of course, Kennedy's killed November 22nd. December rolls around. Johnson's like, we're gonna relax that. We're not gonna do that. The rest is history.
Yeah, that's the other leg. So we have Robert going after Israel for not registering as lobbyists, and then we have John Kennedy himself personally via letter, telegrams, cables, stating in no uncertain terms just what you said. He was very diplomatic. He wasn't being belligerent, and he didn't accuse them of anything.
But there's pressure there between the lines.
Well, the pressure was, we need to get in there and look right now. And if you don't let us, it's going to affect this nation's support for Israel. Wow. So it's alloyed. It was just like straight. It's like, this is how it's going to be.
And what you're talking about, Ken, is the Battle of the Letters.
War of Letters.
War of Letters.
War of the Letters. And now, talking about classified, the reason nobody knows the story is these letters were classified until the 21st century.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Now, and let's go to the scholars, right? The Kennedy scholars. So they know this stuff exists. So why haven't they been talking about it? I have to ask this question. And I think it all boils down to the reality that everything's a business at the end of the day. And books, you need publishers, and there's more than one publisher that is very happy to publish Kennedy assassination books. It's no problem. In fact, I can think of one that I know has published probably 50. And then you have the being given access to the media, to be part of documentaries, to be part of TV shows, right? And then access to the conferences. There's a business in JFK conferences. So my question is, who controls these platforms? And is it possible that it was made clear, either overtly or covertly, or hey, just figure it out for yourself, that if you start talking about potential Israeli involvement in the assassination, you're not getting any book contracts, you're not appearing on CBS News, you're not going to be in the JFK documentary, you're out of the game. So I don't want to besmirch anybody, but because they've done phenomenal research, but it's like, I can, based on reading the research, I can figure out who shined Jack Ruby's shoes the day before he shot Oswald. But I can't find out that JFK was, in the summer of '63, before he was murdered, was engaged in a heated battle with the Israelis over, a trivial little thing like nuclear weapons. It's odd, right?
Ken, it's really odd because honestly, like I said before, man, up until a few years ago, I didn't know anything about the Israeli connection to this, and I thought I was a decent student of the assassination, and it's wild, man. I still think there's so much to uncover and learn about it. But then, you get Yitzhak Rabin's wife, her biography, where she talks about the fact that her and her husband were in Dallas the day that he was killed, and he would later become, I think, prime minister in the 70s and maybe later on in the 90s before his own untimely assassination.
Yeah.
That's and drawing it to a direct correlation and line to today, some of the extremists who were involved in that assassination are allies in Netanyahu's current government.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah,
that's why I think it's still relevant, and that's why we have these conversations. And it's just this wasn't that long ago, and it's still relevant to today.
Also, even a lot of the other branches of that have been suggested as potential conspirators, a lot of those people had Israeli connections. So if we look at organized crime, we always talk about the Italians. I'm half Italian. The Italians always make a lot of noise, and they eating the pasta and having all this kind of stuff. People of Jewish ancestry in the United States were major figures in organized crime then and to this day. Meyer Lansky's an example of one person. And then we also have, when they talk about Cubans, well, who are these Cubans? Well, Cuba was run in a lot of ways for the mob before Castro took it over. Batista basically gave the entire casino and entertainment business over to Meyer Lansky. And Meyer Lansky, I think it's in a movie. It's in one of the Godfather movies. They're sitting all together. There's a cake, and they're cutting up all the mobsters. They're literally cutting up Cuba, and that's really the way it went. It wasn't that Meyer Lansky was this super powerful, genius of a guy, but he had the relationship with Batista. He also had great expertise. One thing that guy could do was run a casino, right? So Batista said, "Okay, Meyer, you handle it. I don't want to talk to these other guys. You parcel it out." So every single person that was running a casino and nightclub, and that was a huge business in Cuba, that was massive, had to go through Meyer Lansky, who happened to be an ardent Zionist. I mean, he helped smuggle weapons. We know that for a fact. There's no doubt about it, to Israel illegally.
Yeah, that was going to be my next point. That's a great segue, Ken, to what I wanted to mention about guys like David Ferry, soldiers of fortune who were like part of Operation Mongoose, Operation 40, a lot of leftover World War II munitions that were in bunkers all around America and like Florida and up and down the East Coast were raided by these kind of guys like David Ferry, gun runners and gun smugglers. I'm sure Ruby was part of that milieu too. And a lot of those weapons were routed to Israel. And those are the guys who did it. And I didn't know about any of this stuff until the last 5 years. So that there's a lot of tentacles and tie-ins to the assassination and the players who are suspected to be involved. And I try to explain to people very much like what you said, if you kind of buy into this Israeli Zionist extremist angle of it, a lot of it is downstream from hardcore Zionists in Israel. And then it goes through like Permindex and Louis Bloomfield in Canada. And then it goes into people like David Ferry and Jack Ruby and Bannister. And it's just in the mafia in New Orleans. It's all tied in together. If you're willing to do the work and dig, you start seeing things you can't ignore.
Well, there was money to be made. The Israeli government had money. They needed arms. Where were they going to get them? Well, as you pointed out, there's so many guns, so much military gear sitting all over the world.
Just collecting dust.
Yeah, I mean, lots of it too. Not like a closet full, like warehouses full. And it's often not guarded very well. And if you're a gangster, and it happens in the United States, and if you're a gangster, you know where it is. And, what does a gangster do? Gangster knows how to steal.
Exactly. And not only that, if you were OSS, now CIA, and were a soldier in World War II, you'd have tie-ins to that as well. And you would be involved in that, and you would know about it.
Absolutely. And, to bring this back to Angleton, Angleton has such an interesting background. His father was a real go-getter. He was a high-ranking executive in National Cash Register, and people may go, well, that doesn't sound very exciting. Well, you have to understand, before the computer, the cash register was the most high-tech thing in the universe. People used to keep their cash in a drawer, right? So having a cash register where you could tally up the sales and print out a thing, that was a big deal. So his father got the franchise to run National Cash Register in Italy, in fascist Italy. And people think of Italy as an easygoing place, and the country's really split too. There's northern Italy and there's southern Italy. Northern Italy is very industrialized and very financialized, and in fact, it's one of the biggest industrial centers in all of Europe, northern Italy. So there was a lot of business to be had, and of course, Mussolini wanted to regiment the country and make it corporate friendly. In fact, he invented fascism to make that possible. So we know that Angleton's dad had to be at least fascist friendly, because you were not going to be able to run the franchise for anything in Italy if do business on a large scale if you weren't friendly with the fascists, because all the leading industrialists were pro-Mussolini and pro-fascist. So young James was just soaked in that attitude from an early age. When he joined the OSS, they used that. They put him in charge of operations in Italy, and he was in charge of operations in Italy after the war, under the CIA during the strategy of tension and
Gladio.
And Gladio. What was Gladio? Gladio was this calculation that, hey, Europe's pretty flat, and they could probably run large parts of Europe over really fast. So what we have to do is we have to have basically a covert armies in every country. By the way, it wasn't limited to Italy, and right. they have to have stashes of arms, and they're going to fight, kind of an OSS style sabotage, hit and run.
Guerrilla stay behind.
Exactly. Yeah. So who did and so our friend James Angleton was very part of that. So who did they staff? Who did they use to be troops for these stay behind armies? Local gangsters and fascists.
Yeah.
Right. So Angleton was neck deep in fascism and gangsterism as soon as he started working for the OSS and later the CIA. And now the reason I'm bringing that up now in context of what we were talking about before, there were a lot of weapon stashes in Italy belonging to the United States. And a lot of those weapons somehow found their way to Israel right after the war. And it was James Angleton's job to not let stuff like that happen. He was supposed to know everything that was going on. And he certainly knew the transportation of ex-Nazis and ex-fascists out of Italy, because he participated in that.
The rat lines.
So he theoretically, because moving arms isn't easy. Like you got to use. You're not taking a truck. You're not driving a truck through Bulgaria and Turkey, and Lebanon. It's a ship. There aren't an infinite number of ports. Ports are relatively easy to surveil. So Angleton should have known, and maybe he did know, and maybe he let it happen. So and the other thing too, people should know, and a lot of the stuff I'm talking about now is not in the book, but it's good for people to know that the Zionists, the militant, extremist Zionists, loved fascist Italy. They thought it was the cat's pajamas, to use an old term. They thought it was just the coolest thing ever. In fact, even some early Zionists, even like the Republic of Italy. And I just want to do some real quick history. Italy used to be a million different little principalities, and then it got unified in the late 19th century, and that seemed like a really good thing. The thing that people are missing is that unification allowed the North, the industrialized North, to beat the living crap out of the people in southern Italy and Sicily. So much so that when Booker T. Washington, who was a former slave, visited Sicily, he said, "I know of no black person in America who is as put upon, as put down, as brutalized as a Sicilian peasant."
Wow.
And it was so bad. There was a big sulfur mine in many of them in Sicily. You need sulfur to make what? Gunpowder, right? And so basically the peasants down there had been so impoverished that in order to save their families, they would rent their young boys to the sulfur mines, because it was that or everyone would starve to death. So they would make a sacrifice. The boys never came back. They were literally worked to death. That's how bad it was.
Wow.
Yeah. So the Zionists like that because in Italy, among the Northerners, Southern Italians are considered, not quite white and not really European and not really
down upon.
Exactly. And the early Zionists, way back when the Republic of Italy was brutalizing the South, they're like, yeah, this is the way to do it.
I like these guys.
But it got really in gear when Italy, which had a vision of conquering the entire of Eastern. Hitler wanted to conquer Europe and Eastern Europe and Russia. The Italians wanted to conquer all of Eastern Mediterranean. Right?
Under Mussolini.
Under Mussolini, yeah, that was going to be because the Roman Empire used to expand to the east. They had all that stuff in the old days, So it was Mussolini's idea that we should get it back. So as a warm up, they attacked Libya, and another one of their operations was attacking Ethiopia. And the very first bombing of civilians in human history with chemical weapons was Mussolini, and I believe they killed in Ethiopia 300,000 civilians. And the Zionists looked at this and said, "This is our guy. He gets it. It's not, we're not here to make peace." I mean, if you're looking at it through CNN, it's always, we're here to make peace with our,
peacekeepers.
It was always very clear, we're going to have to kill these people or move them out at the end of a bayonet. And so when they saw the Italians, the Zionists moved to Italy, and the Italians allowed the Zionists to set up their own naval academy in Italy. Now, why did the Zionists? You need ships, right? You need sailors to run ships. Why do you need ships? To move arms.
Smuggle.
Yeah. Absolutely. So Angleton had to have known all this was going on, and I don't know that he did. Obviously, there's no one's come out with the records that he did. But it's like, how could you be in a whorehouse and not realize all these girls hanging out naked and going on with guys? There might be something going on here.
Well, I mean, even just Ken, even just back to the Nakba, like 47, 48. I didn't realize Albert Einstein wrote that letter December 2nd, 1948, talking about the right-wing Zionist extremism and specifically Menachem Begin. So that's something I wasn't even familiar with that Einstein wrote that letter.
Yeah, it's one of the letters in the book. So I forget the date, but Begin was coming. He was just a guy. Was
he like Irgun, or was he like a?
I don't know which flavor of criminal.
I think he was Stern Gang and Irgun and Haganah.
It's possible he might have been mixed around with all of them, but he was coming to the United States to speak, and Einstein and a woman named Hannah Arendt, who was a Jewish person who was very articulate, and she's known for her anti-fascist writings. Einstein, Hannah Arendt, and a whole bunch of other Jewish Americans said, "Don't welcome this pagan guy here. The stuff going on, the stuff that they're doing is horrendous." And he made reference. The letter made reference to a specific atrocity. I said, "We're all very alarmed. We're very ashamed of what's going on. This is not us." I'm paraphrasing, but the letter's in the book and people can read it. And then there's a question that people never ask: is how did the Zionists, the Zionist extremists? First, we know how they got the guns now. They got them from the United States gangsters. They got it from the weapons depots in Italy. They got some from, who's Maxwell?
Robert Maxwell.
Yeah. Maxwell got guns for, that's why they loved Maxwell. Maxwell got guns for them from Czechoslovakia.
He was Czech. Yeah.
60s, Eric, or 70s, or even earlier.
Much earlier.
He was around in the 40s, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was a young man. He was a young guy.
Because they gave him a burial, or all the PMs and heads of Mossad went to his funeral after they whacked him, which I think.
Yeah, and when people, the gratitude, because you can't fight a war without guns. So he was a key man in getting. But the thing that's missing is, where did they get the training? Where did they get the training to run the military operations? And that's an interesting story. The people that trained the Zionist extremists were the British initially, because there was a revolt of the Arabs said, "Hey, look, man, this is our country. Get out of here!" And they started a revolt. And the Zionists were enrolled by the British to run intelligence operations and to learn how to do everything that they do now so well. Surveil and murder. So the British trained them in that, and they got very, very good training. The next group that assisted, this is just sort of a sideline. Pre-World War II, the Polish government trained Zionists in combat operations, including blowing things up, because they were afraid. They needed all hands on deck. They knew the Nazis were coming at some point, and they wanted to enroll as many people as possible. So they trained. The Zionists said, "We'll help." And they were given military training and demolition training, right? The French trained the Zionists because, believe it or not, the French and British were always at each other's throats. The British were trying to disrupt things in Lebanon and Syria, because they're pricks, and the French in retaliation were literally supporting Israeli Zionist terrorists in Israel in retaliation, right?
And the French played a big role in helping build Dimona and help Israel kickstart their nuclear program.
Huge.
Oh, really?
And that's the work. I have to give a big shout to my friend Ryan Dawson. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, Ken.
Oh yeah.
On NUMEC.
Yeah.
And let me correct myself too. Menahem Begin was the leader of the Irgun from 43 to 48. So that was his.
Yeah, it's hard to you really need a program to keep track.
Like you need a map.
The Ryan Dawson crime map to do this.
Yeah. But the relationship between Israel and England and France is really interesting. So the British and French got together with the Kickstart campaign by the famous Red Cross people. What are they? Red Shield, the Rothschild people, and the Rothschilds, huge big bankers, obviously, and part of their business involved East-West trade, right? And they thought, gee, wouldn't it be lovely if we had a canal that went through Egypt to the Red Sea, that would save all of our ships from having to go all the way around Africa. So the Rothschilds kickstarted it, and then once they started, everybody else poured in, and the canal was built through the sovereign country of Egypt, right? Which was then, I think, was it part of the Ottomans? I don't know, but in any event, it was somebody else's country.
Was Nasser the head at that time?
Oh no, this was way back. This is like 19th century.
Oh, way before Nasser. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. So, but Nasser, I find in the 50s, woke up and said, "Hey, there's a canal running through our country, and it's not ours." And you know what? I think it's going to be ours. So they repatriated it. All right. Now the French and the English sort of said, "Oh God, this is terrible," but they didn't do anything. But a few months later, the Israeli military staged an attack based on some other pretense on Egypt, right? They made themselves very useful. And then the good British and French military came down to separate the two warring parties and tried to occupy the area. And Eisenhower, to his credit, one of the good things he did, said, get out of there, leave that canal alone. But it earned the undying gratitude of England, but France in particular. And that's how the sharing of nuclear technology from France to Israel began. Now, remember,
wow,
there were a lot of brilliant people of Jewish ancestry in the sciences, right? A lot of them ended up in Israel. So that was like, if you were playing cards, that would be an ace, right? Up your sleeve. So when France was developing its own its own nuclear weapons program, it used Israeli scientists to help them build it. And when they were doing open air testings in Algeria, because they ruled Algeria very brutally until the 60s, the Israeli scientists would come and observe and watch and participate in all the experimentation that was going on. So yes, France helped Israel develop its nuclear weapons program, but Israel helped France develop its nuclear weapon program. So it wasn't a top down. It was more of a cycle. Yep. And then another big thing related to Kennedy. This is really important. As a young man, as a senator in his 30s, senator from Massachusetts. I mean, you guys can relate to this because you're from New Hampshire. What political? Well, today's a different story, but in the 50s, what political gain would you get by speaking out on behalf of Algerians and against the French? How would that go? How would that go over?
Probably not well, or for the Palestinians, like he said in his 1939 letter to his father. Palestine's not the Brits to give.
Exactly.
But
he was. You raised a really important point, and this is also in the book. Kennedy was on the ground in Palestine as a very young man in the 30s.
He was 22 or something, or 20.
Yeah, like right out of college.
Yeah. He went over there in 1939 as a young man.
Yeah. He also went to Indochina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he knew this was, and he's the only president that got they didn't have degrees in those days in international relations, but had like not a certificate, but an add-on. He specialized in international relations. The only other president that did anything like that was Clinton, and Clinton was trained as a diplomat, believe it or not. He went to the diplomatic school at Georgetown. But Kennedy is the only president that we've ever had that actually made his focus international relations starting as a young man. So
yeah, he was already really well traveled before he became president in 1961.
Well, so his father, people don't realize this about his father.
The ambassador.
Yeah, ambassador to England. At one point, his father was the 5th richest man in the United States. Like, he was right up there with the Rockefellers.
He was. So, that's very true.
So you don't get to be that rich and be dumb and disinterested in world affairs, especially because he was in finance, right? So he trained his sons in how to look at the world, around the dinner table. I mean, this is sort of legendary. He would discuss world affairs. So young John and young Bobby were getting educated. Then John took the tour, and then John went to Harvard, and where he studied international relations. But here's the thing that may have also gotten Kennedy killed, and people don't really think about this. France took control of Algeria in the early-ish 19th century, and they just raped, pillaged, murdered on a scale we can barely imagine. I think 1/3 of all civilians in Algeria were murdered. Right?
Wow.
And go, well, what's the attraction of Algeria? Well, there's a pretty broad area of Algeria on the Mediterranean coast that's got really good farmland, and it's close to France. And in fact, Algeria was considered a French province legally.
Right.
They just thought they weren't like occupying it. In their mind, it was theirs, right? So in the 1950s, the Algerians started fighting back, and going back to young Kennedy in his 30s, senator from Massachusetts, he got on the floor of the Senate and gave a long 5,000-word speech about what a bad idea it was for France to do what they were doing in Algeria and for the United States to support it. right? So he didn't do this to win votes back home, right? I don't see people from old Massachusetts giving two hoots
in the 50s as a young. Yeah, and I got that clip, Ken, that you sent me that I never saw before until you introduced. I can show it actually. Let me share my screen here, and then you can give a little.
See this, man. This tells a lot, and then we'll talk about why his respect and support for Algerians might have contributed to him being murdered. So let's look at the clip. Yeah,
Kennedy was real big on nations and their right to self-determination, for sure.
Very much. I mean, his father was a businessman, not a imperialist, and also, and remember, they're Irish. So when they came over, the older dirt.
All right, so we're going to do a couple minutes or a little bit of this clip, and then we're going to have Ken fill this in. This apparently is October of 1962. President Ben Bella of recently free Algeria, or we'll go into it, but let's watch a little bit. Hopefully we don't get copyrighted.
Maybe I should take. We should be okay.
So what are we seeing here, Ken? We're seeing President Kennedy.
Yeah. So here's the deal. You pause that. Just pause that so we can look at that. It's a really good image. So this is the Rose Garden of the White House, and I want to ask everybody: in all your life, have you ever seen such a lavish reception for anybody ever on the White House grounds? This is all the military coming out, and not three guys with a flag. Like it looks like 30 guys deep.
Pretty grandiose.
Color guards, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, all important people were called out for this meeting. There's a red carpet. So that's kind of significant if you think into it a little bit, right? And so why would you do that? Well, you're doing that to send a message. And what's the message? Number one, you're sending a message to the troops because the troops are all there. And it's like, Algerians are our friends. We're not going to be involved in murdering these people or helping people murder these people.
And the French tried to assassinate this guy, right?
They even tried to assassinate de Gaulle for daring to. De Gaulle was the guy that finally threw in the towel and said, "Okay, we're out."
Charles de Gaulle.
And yes, Charles de Gaulle, the great war hero, the man that held France, France in exile together. Right. I mean,
I share his quote every year, Ken, on the anniversary of the assassination. He said, "President Kennedy died a soldier in the line of duty in service to his country." De Gaulle said that.
Well, de Gaulle knew.
Yeah.
De Gaulle, they're not dumb. These French people, they're pretty smart. A lot smarter than we may give them credit for. So after de Gaulle pulled out, the extremists in Algeria, because there were a lot of people, just like when the mobs in Cuba, and they're just making money hand over fist, and they get booted out by Castro. They want to kill Castro. Okay, well, de Gaulle is the guy that withdrew France from Algeria. So all the people that were making money down there were furious, and there were a lot of right wingers, and there were a lot of former military and former intelligence people, and they set up an operation to kill de Gaulle, and it didn't succeed.
Yeah, he challenged their grift. He was upending their apple cart.
Yeah, I mean, or another expression I used to like. I used to study martial arts, and there was an expression in Asia. You broke the guy's rice bowl. Not gonna. You're not gonna make a friend that way.
You rubbed his rhubarb.
Yeah. So the French actually have really good criminal intelligence people. Intelligence people who are criminals, who are very good at murder, very good at assassination. And some people have theorized that there might have been a French shooter or two involved in this. Corsicans. Now that brings us back to organized crime in America, and it also brings us back to the Swiss banks that were operated by Zionists that were at fronts for arms trading, and happened to end up being fronts for the laundering of drug money. Right. So these things. So wherever
they're connected.
So when you look at Johnson, when you look at organized crime, I haven't mentioned the haven't explained the Cubans fully, but when you look at the Cubans, when you look at the Corsicans, and even the Texas oil people, were a crazy crew. They wanted to have functionally their own separate country, just functionally, because they had buckets of money, and they wanted to be independent of the Eastern establishment, and so they were doing their own ambassadorship, their own diplomacy,
like Murchison and D.H. Byrd and stuff.
Yeah, to Central American countries. Well, one of the key fixers in that milieu, who was working with the oil people, working with the Latin American dictators, was a Zionist, a Zionist attorney, who was also very connected to Europe. So, also very connected to Israel. So wherever you look, whether it's the mob or the CIA or even the oil guys, or Lyndon Johnson, the Zionists aren't just sort of floating around. The Zionists are welded at the hip.
There's a through line through all that.
Yeah, connective tissue and fingerprints at every angle. Really, it's downstream from, like we said earlier. And are you familiar with Corey Hughes's work on the assassination?
That's a new name to me. Yeah.
Oh, you would really vibe with. I've learned so much from Corey Hughes. He one of his books out is called like a lesson from history,
a warning from history.
And he really digs deep into the Zionist connections, and the mafia and Angleton.
Jack Ruby's, he's talking about Jack Ruby's rabbi, the people out in California, Meyer Lansky, Bloomfield up in Canada, Permandex, Central Mondial Commercial. And,
well, it's there are these people. I mean, by definition, Johnson was a criminal. The Cubans were thrown out of Cuba. And then they were. Here's the thing I want to say, because it helps explain these Cubans. Because people say the Cubans, it's like, well, what do you mean? Well, the casinos were very lucrative, and casinos require security, and the security was managed the American organized crime. And they recruited local guys, local thugs, to do the security for the casinos. And they loaned them to Batista. Okay. So in Cuba in the 50s, if you did a podcast, they didn't have podcasts, of course, but if there had been podcasts, our dead bodies would have been in the street in Havana tomorrow. Okay. Yeah. I don't think people realize how violent 1950s Cuba was. It's a very, we think of Cuba, hey, bongo drums and, rum and pretty girls. That's part of it. Yeah. But they are gangsters, or they have that ability, right? So when Castro took over, these guys had to flee for their lives, because Castro grabbed a lot of them and summarily executed them, which seemed like a kind of harsh thing.
Rationalized.
But unless you knew who these guys were and what they were known to have done.
Did he lock up Santos Traficante too, and Ruby visited him? Have you heard that story?
Oh, yeah. I mean, vaguely I'm aware. Yeah.
Well, and then not even to speak of United Fruit and the Dulles brothers and their grift that they had going under Batista.
Yeah.
That they lost after Castro came in and kicked all their asses out.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a perfect storm.
But what you had were basically the gangster class of Cuba is what left Cuba.
Right.
Because Castro was going to kill them.
Went to Miami.
Yeah, and they went to Miami. Boy, if you want to get killed, just talk like I'm talking and go to Miami. We're not going to say any more about that, because occasionally I do go to Miami.
Jesus.
But they're hardcore.
I just watched Cocaine Cowboys for the first time, Ken. I don't know if you've seen that documentary, but wow. The late 1970s in Cuba, are you kidding me? All the criminals that Fidel sent over here to us from Cuba. I meant to Miami from Cuba.
That's what happened. The Cuban gangsters, when they got booted out of Cuba, became the drug dealers and money of Miami.
Right. So the heavy-handedness of Fidel, I mean, of course, it's brutal and we don't like violence, but if you're coming at it from that perspective, understanding who these people were, you meet violence with violence.
It was kind of a war, because if you were anything other than an ardent supporter of Batista and you wanted to say anything, I'm not kidding, you'd just be straight out killed.
Right.
So
Right.
when he was taken out, and he was killed by a specific group of people. He was killed by people who also had very deep connections with organized crime, because during their day job was to security at the casino. Their night job was to go out and be a death squad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's basically what was going. So when people talk about the Cubans, that's who the Cubans are.
Right. It's not just random Cubans with an axe to grind. There's a very, very specific, belief and experience behind them. So, I mean, whenever we have Kennedy assassination-oriented guests, I always like to ask, and you don't have to answer it if you don't want to. Do you have any kind of in your gut who you think the actual gunmen were, or did you ever look into that, or have any thoughts on that, or ever speculate on it?
Well, it's very interesting. I look at the current assassination story, and it's so similar. You have the patsy. They say he was shooting from, this other thing, and then you spend 5 seconds looking at it, and you realize that shot could not have come from that direction. There's no way. Because one thing I don't understand, if you don't mind me going off on Kirk, because
whatever we want, Ken.
Kirk, let's see. I got to go this way. Yeah. Anyway, because it's reversed sometimes with this. But it was clear the direction Kirk was shot from, because it's the direction his body went. So his body initially lit up, and then it went with the flow of the weapon, right, of the round. So it couldn't have been front on. It had to be side. So you have the patsy. You have a cover story already in place, and instead of being a disgruntled Marxist who had gone to Russia, you had a guy that liked furries. I don't know. It was just the craziest story ever. They tried to. No, by the way, notice that's falling apart. Like, nobody believes that this guy that he shot, whoever shot him because of trans rights. I don't think there's anyone that believes that. But they wanted. There was a
narrative in place.
They really thought they'd gotten away with that. And by the way, have you noticed that apparently the head of the FBI, Kash Patel, what a well-named guy, Kash Patel, right?
Cash.
He's apparently backing off from the authenticity of those love letters that the shooter sent to his furry boyfriend. He's like, yeah, we'll talk about that later.
That looked like a bad Chat GP friggin' thing done by someone at the academy.
But it was literally the same setup. You had a shooter in a location that was impossible, but he got hung with it. You had the backstory was created, and then Kennedy was actually shot from a different area. So the question is, one of the first questions is, where was Kennedy shot from, actually? And I just don't. It could have been the grassy knoll. It could have been I think it's called the Dow Tex building.
Dow Tex, yep.
Yeah. And it could have been the jail. I've heard
the roof of the jail.
Yeah, and so there's all places. It could have been from the sewer. I mean, there's all sorts of places.
There could have been an actual team in the depository on the roof or another floor.
Yeah, that's also entirely possible. So I don't know. I just don't know that. But here's what I do know. I do know that they had a patsy in play that already pre-selected. I do know they had a deep cover story for the patsy. I do know that they, just like with Kirk, the FBI seems to be, the Keystone Cops. Like, they just can't do nothing right. We just can't do. We're so incompetent,
Keystone Cash.
Yeah, Keystone Cash, exactly.
I'll see you in Valhalla, brother. We got this. No, we don't got this.
Yeah, and then we've got the news media is in line, and they see no evil, hear no evil, tell no evil. It's the same exact setup. And what's also identical and was so interesting is there's a lot of ways to kill somebody. You can poison them, you can crash their plane, you can crash their car, you can smoke inhalation from a fire in a hotel. I mean, so many things you could do. To do this was high art.
Statement.
A statement that required the highest level of skill. So I don't know who pulled the trigger. I almost say it doesn't matter.
Sure. I asked Mike, if he had any theories or, because we always love to throw around with Kennedy-oriented guests who actually know their stuff and have spent a lot of time in this, who they think the actual gunmen were. And
I can contribute something about the Robert Kennedy thing, but I think people already know that. There was a renting.
Before that, Ken, you mentioned the Italians and the French. I think. Are you familiar with Aberelli's Coup in Dallas book?
Don't know it. I'm surprisingly ignorant about a lot of stuff.
So he part of his research is, I think that the name of one of the assassins is Jean Sautré, was the French. I don't know if that name has come up in some of your work. He was probably a double agent, had connections to that post World War II fascist rat line, had Zionist connections. So I don't know if that's a name that you would have heard as one of the possible gunmen.
I don't know, but when we're talking about Corsicans, we're also probably talking about the heroin trade. And
Absolutely.
French connection.
Yeah, and that was yet another foot that Kennedy was stepping on. He wasn't down with a wide open heroin trade going on.
No.
So between the fact that he completely enraged the extreme right wing French military and intelligence people, and he was making noises about potentially interfering with the heroin trade that the French were involved with. Here's a little, if I may, heroin's such an important part of American history.
It really is. It doesn't get talked about as much.
And
cocaine. Yeah.
Yeah, he did it. He talked about it. But the French, ruled Indochina, ran Indochina, and it wasn't a very profitable operation actually for them. And so the way they paid their bills was by running the opium trade. So the French government ran the opium trade on a huge scale in order just to break even. And then everything else they stole on top of that was profit. So the heroin trade. So everybody knows about the opium wars and the British and the gunboats and all that. French were doing the same thing in Indochina. And so one of the things that happened after the French got kicked out is there was that very lucrative opium/heroin trade that somebody wanted to take over. And it looks like the U.S. Took it over, and it looks like also Lansky and there was the fellow Traficante apparently was extremely involved in the heroin trade out of Vietnam. I mean, why would an Italian gangster from Miami, or not Miami, Tampa, make trips to Vietnam?
Where does that connection come from? And
Are you kidding me?
There's the stories, of course, of and this is disgusting, but I think it's true, of drugs being smuggled in the body bags of troops back from Vietnam.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And interesting enough, Fort Bragg, which seems to be implicated in the heroin trade out of Afghanistan.
There's a lot of weird shit with Fort Bragg, man.
Well, you get the special forces guys, and there's some good guys in that community, and there are some criminal psychopaths in that community too.
Like anything, right? It's
but the problem is they're very well trained in murder and mayhem. So and some of they have ice. I mean, yeah, to do that kind of work, you have to have ice water in your veins. Just even if you're a good guy, because if you don't, you can't do that kind of work because you're murdering people. That's your job.
Yeah.
So when when somebody has that orientation mentally, and they have a criminal bent, and they're adrenaline junkies, and they're scofflaws, they're going to get into the drug trade.
Yeah, I mean that's how they fund these black ops and these off and they say, oh no, the CIA is beholden to Congress and the budget goes through Congress. Bullshit. Okay, a lot of that stuff off books is funded by cocaine and heroin. Well, in reality.
There's a very famous, it's not a famous memo. It's a very important memo, and it was written by the head of the DEA. Drawing a blank on his name. I know a relative of his, but I can't remember her last name. But anyway, he wrote a memo saying, "Hey, this is the head of the DEA. What the heck's going on? The CIA seems to be doing whatever the hell they want to do related to drugs." And basically the way it works is within the United States, the DEA is allowed to do their job, to the extent that they do their job. Overseas, not so. Every major thing that they're engaged in overseas has to be approved by the CIA.
Wow.
This is a structural problem. And this appears in an actual official memo from the head of the DEA pointing it out.
Some turf wars.
Yeah, I'm almost who was the famous guy that the hero of Scotland,
William Wallace.
Yeah, there was another guy though, Bennett. Unfortunately, I can't remember this guy's name. But anyway, he was head of the DEA. He did draft an official memo, which can be found if you look for it. And I actually had a colleague talk to him about it, or try to talk to him about it in the midst of an interview about another subject, and he did not want to talk about that memo. He was like, "How did you?" His first question was, "How did you know about it?"
Yeah.
Oh, it's an official memo. It's unclassified. Some people actually do research.
That was like I asked Jeb Bush about the Florida flight schools, and the flight school where Muhammad Atta showed up in July of 2000 was busted with over 40 pounds of heroin, which was the largest heroin bust owned by Wally Hilliard, who was a Clinton and Bush campaign donator, and run by a Dutch national named Rudy Deckers, who later went to jail for trafficking, who was one of the biggest witnesses for the 9/11 Commission, who happened to have these pilots come in at a historical CIA drug running airport, and they weren't interested in learning how to land, and yet he trained them, and foreign nationals at that time weren't supposed to be running flight schools. But anyways, I asked Jeb Bush, I said, Jeb, what happened to all the files on Huffman Aviation that you took onto a C-130 plane chartered by a CIA agent that was flown to DC? And he was like, he said the same thing. He's like, basically, how'd you know about that? Like,
hey, let me give you another one. Everyone knows Jim Jones, right? In Jonestown.
Jonestown, yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So that before he brought all those people down to Guyana, he was running an operation in San Francisco on Geary and Fillmore. Basically, the building's gone now. There's a post office there, but it was big building with lots and lots and lots of records. They didn't bring all their records to Guyana with them. When that whole thing went down, Governor Jerry Brown sent the state troopers with trucks. They loaded those trucks up with all the papers in that building. They brought them to the airport, and they flew them to Sacramento.
And they were probably never seen again.
Well, what's interesting, and they didn't get all the papers, right? In fact, I think there's somebody in your state, a journalist who used to write for the Sun-Times, or maybe he's in Northern Vermont, who got some of them. And
really?
And what's so interesting is that I brought this up occasionally because I have a website, a very primitive, but it's circa 1997 website on the Jonestown San Francisco connection. And I occasionally I'll get documentarians calling me up saying, "Oh, would you tell us some stuff?" And I say, "Yeah, you should really look at the records that are None of them want to go there. They all want to talk about they want to talk about the madman and
I think so. There's stuff about Leo Ryan's staff or people connected to Leo Ryan that knew more.
Yeah,
right?
This was a congressman that was assassinated in the course of duty.
Yeah, it was a handful.
Yeah, the only one.
I refer people to my friend Jose Gallison and Austin Picard. They're parapolitics millennial bros like my brother and I, and they have done the dirty and the deep dive on Jonestown and all the connections to intelligence.
We should connect Ken with them. And
oh my God, it's frightening stuff. Frightening. I mean, that thing was basically probably a massive CIA mind control psyop.
Behavioral study.
Absolutely, and they used
poor black people.
Exactly, and
homeless people. It's so gross.
Well, but here's what's really interesting: the reason those people were homeless is because the politicians of San Francisco decided to do what they call urban renewal in the largest black neighborhood commercial district west of the Mississippi, the Fillmore. I used to live in that, so I knew. I lived there for years. Even as a little kid, I it's a long story. But
did you ever see the Allman Brothers play there?
I didn't. I missed that part. So I was there in '67 when I was 7. So I would actually go through the old black neighborhood on my way to school.
Wow.
And then I moved back when I was in my 30s. And then I met because they didn't succeed in removing all. The goal was to remove all the black people from San Francisco. That was their goal.
Right.
And they didn't succeed. And so I met a lot of the older people. And they let me in on the story, and then I confirmed it with historians and so on. So the powers that be just gutted that neighborhood, just destroyed it, and rendered a lot of people homeless. They said, "Hey, we'll give you a housing voucher," and of course, the housing voucher was worthless because there was no housing for them to go to. So many disenfranchised black people found themselves members of the church, living on a mattress on the floor, being fed oatmeal, and
Right.
working 18 hours a day for Jones.
Didn't Jones have a grift where their benefits went directly to him?
Absolutely. Yeah, so so he became the I don't know what the right word is, not the custodian.
Like father. He was the father for them.
Kind of, yeah. Like there's another legal term, not custodian, but anyway,
power of attorney.
Conservators, yeah. And so, but the other thing that people never talk about is many, hundreds of children were signed over to him as well by the family court, right?
Right.
So what this shines a light on, and the reason I bring it up is that could not have happened without the full enthusiastic cooperation of the actual political establishment in San Francisco.
Mm.
They loved Jim Jones. Why? Because Jim Jones got out the vote for them.
For the Democrats, right?
The Democrats. So when he wanted something, yeah, fine. What do you want? You want to be? They made him head. They made him head of the Housing Commission. Yeah, they made him president of the Housing Commission.
Something he had a lot of favor. He curried a lot of favor, and I got to tell you, Ken, he reminds me of Newsom. Newsom is like a proper psychopath, in my opinion.
Well, he Newsom's family, criminals,
Aren't they wine merchant criminals?
No, it goes way back. Have you ever seen the video that gives the biography of Newsom, Pelosi, and some of the other ones? I mean, they literally have, straight up criminals in their ancestry.
A lot of these are all over the world, and kind of to bring it back to Israel and the U.S. These are mafias, basically. Whether it's the Cubans, the Israelis, the Americans, the Italians, these are literal mafias that have control over state media, over fundraising, and over government at this point in the year 2025. I believe we are it's just competing mafias, and sometimes the interests align and they work together, and sometimes they don't align and they butt heads.
Yeah, our dream is that they start to hate each other and start killing each other. That would be the ideal thing. But yeah, it's all this underworld that includes politicians, it includes news media owners, it includes intelligence people, it includes law enforcement.
Yeah. The rot runs deep, and I was very encouraged. I saw Joe Rogan had one of the Weinstein brothers on, not of the Harvey Weinstein fame, the Brett and Eric Weinstein, those academics, who kind of knew Epstein on some level. And Rogan mentioned the Franklin scandal, the pedophile ring out of Nebraska.
No way, he talked about that?
Tim Dillon red-pilled him on that when he was on the show a while ago. Because, are you familiar with Tim Dillon?
Oh, yeah.
Well, he's my favorite comedian. He
is the absolute best.
He's like our triplet. There's a joke that...
Yeah, there you go.
It's funny because we've been on the same track as Tim Dillon for the last 20 years, and he's only a year older than us, and he ended up becoming this big comedian. We've seen him and met him a couple times, but sorry, Eric, I didn't. What was that?
There must have been something in the stars when all you guys were born, that created an imprint,
Yeah, not all of us millennials are bad,
No, and not all of us boomers are bad either.
Dude, exactly. Ken, you are what I will refer to affectionately as a based boomer. That's what
you were born in 1960 or 59?
59.
Yeah. My favorite musicians are born in 59. Brian Setzer, Ian McCulloch from Echo and the Bunnymen, Robert Smith from The Cure. Who else was born in 59? It'll come to me, but 59 it's a good year.
It was a great year.
Right in the wheelhouse, yeah.
So, sorry, Eric, you make your point, and then I want to make...
Yeah, so we were just talking about how power works and nexuses and mafias and cartels and the child trafficking and pedophilia thing, which is now finally reaching critical mass because of the Epstein thing. Of course, before that, any of us who've been students of parapolitics and how power works know about the Franklin scandal and Lawrence King and Omaha, Nebraska, and what that all was. So I saw Rogan talk about that to his audience, largest podcast in the world. So that's encouraging. So I think the dam is breaking on a lot of this stuff. And when you look at it from 30,000 feet, man, it is all connected. And you end up seeing a lot of the same names and the same groups and mafias who were involved in all of it.
Somebody once said this, and I forget who it was, but he said, actually it's a known limited number of people, and they're all working together in a whole wide variety of operations. It's like a band of gypsies. I don't mean to say anything bad against gypsies, but it's like they're itinerant workers, who engage. They're just twisted people that somehow are attracted.
Yeah, they end up. Politicians are largely just errand boys for these people.
They're whores. Most politicians are just whores. That's what
I Jesse Ventura says they should all wear NASCAR jackets with the names of the corporations, Ken,
with their sponsors on there.
Sponsors, you should say Pfizer and Raytheon and Boeing on it, so I know who owns that governor. And
then he tells the great story of when he unexpectedly became governor. You know the story. The CIA paid a visit on him
down in the basement of the Capitol, Ken.
Like 20 guys sat around a table with him, asking him, "How did you do this?
How'd you do it?
How'd you beat him?"
I told the truth, and I spent $300,000, and I talked about wrestling to the young people, and I defeated a Norm Coleman and a Humphrey, a legacy politician in Minnesota.
He body slammed the duopoly out in Minnesota.
Yeah,
we should retaliate in '98 was my campaign slogan, Ken. Okay. Yeah, we've had Ventura on the podcast a few times.
Oh, really?
We're buddies with his son Tyrell.
Oh, okay.
And Jesse he's just a legend.
He's one of our heroes.
He's one of our heroes. He was kind of cringe on COVID, and he's got some bad boomer tendencies, which is okay. But then he has his base boomer out tendencies far outweigh the bad.
Oh, he gets a pass on supporting Tim Walz because when Tim Walz signed the marijuana thing, he did invite Governor Ventura to be a part of that. I know that meant a lot to Ventura because he was at the front end of that.
Walz is a perfect example of absolute criminal.
Just a creep.
Hey, let me tell you a little story. So there was a supermarket that went out of business in Minneapolis. And, when a supermarket goes bad, it's usually because the location's bad. And it's really hard to bring those things back. So this thing was sitting vacant. Tim Walz bought it at like many multiples of its value from a friend. And it was going to be used as a COVID action center, right? It never was used for squat. So the state of Minnesota owns this absolutely useless building somewhere that they massively overpaid for, and it just happened to go into the pockets of one of his friends. I mean, there's endless stories like that about this guy.
Does not surprise me at all.
He's the guy that the Democrats brought in to appeal to working class white Americans, white American guys. That dork, that doofus. It's unbelievable.
So Kennedy was the only president to visit Israel, I think twice, or he visited in 1951, and I think did he, obviously before he was president, and did he visit again in?
I don't know.
He met with Ben Gurion in New York City in 1961. I know that, but I think I don't know if Nixon was the next president to go to Israel, but it could because in some of my research, Kennedy had said some positive things about Israel and they have a right to defend themselves and all those talking points. But I really think by 1963, man, he was like, things are not going to go well unless you open up, let me inspect Amona for real and don't blow smoke up my ass and tell me that it's just for peaceful means.
Right. I mean, he wanted it to work. All the letters and cables and telegrams in the book, they're very diplomatic. There's no belligerence. But there was firmness. There was absolutely there's no doubt of what was in his mind. And just to bring this full circle, that reached a pitch in the summer of 1963. And in the fall of 1963, he was shot in a mysterious way, so mysterious we still can't even figure out how it was done.
We're still talking about it, yeah. And is it true, Ken, that LBJ was the first president to sell jets? He sold the Phantom jets.
He was the first president to sell serious offensive weapons. Absolutely. We had been selling. I mean, I think some rifles went to them. It's not really they're offensive weapons technically, but really big hardware, that was Johnson. And Johnson, I can't remember the percentage. He 7x'd American military support.
Wow.
For Israel. I mean, it was and previously it had all been defensive systems. Even the missiles that Kennedy provided the Israelis were defensive missiles, not aggressive. Well, it's hard to say, but they were meant to shoot planes down, not meant to lob munitions into other countries.
Right. Yeah, Kennedy was just overall very worried about nuclear weapons. And, sometimes after I've had a couple drinks, I watch the peace speech from June of '63. And I just, is there a better speech? I don't know. That might be my favorite Kennedy speech.
Yep.
Some refer to it as a speech that got him killed. It's just a beautiful, forward-looking, prescient speech.
Well, and the one thing we haven't talked about is once you declare somebody a risk to national security, and then you can kill them, right?
You're justified.
And I think that applies to anybody, including JFK. And I think the military-industrial complex is so powerful and was so concerned about what Kennedy would have done to their rice bowl, to their
breaking the rice bowl.
Yeah. And we have to remember, too, there was all this fear of communism and fear of the Soviet Union, and they were going to invade it tomorrow. So anybody that was like, hey, let's talk to these guys. Let's see if we can not go to war. That could have been interpreted. And remember, there were some wackadoodle, crazy nut jobs at the highest levels of the military.
Oh, like LeMay and Lemser.
Yeah.
LeMay.
Yeah, those are the marquee names. But the whole military was infused with people like that. So that's another group of people that could have been involved in killing Kennedy. And then if I could just say this thing, because it's really important, why does Israel exist as a garrison state in the first place?
Right.
And it's because we really want to control the Middle East. Like we don't want to leave that up to chance, and
sure.
and we don't want to leave that up to diplomacy or free trade. Right. And so just like a gangster, I'm not personally going to go down to the bad neighborhood and sell crack on a street corner, but I'm going to assign somebody to do that for me. And I believe that's basically Israel's function in the world, on behalf of the United States, on behalf of England, on behalf of France, on behalf of Germany, to be the headbanger in the Middle East if it ever comes that we need it.
Right. I mean, hey, the Knesset was all built on Rothschild land, so those guys they've been in there from the beginning. And
yeah. Well, they funded. They funded. All the original migration there, and they started
the Balfour Declaration.
Yeah, and they started that early because again, by the way, until the world changed from coal to oil, which happened around the time of the Balfour Declaration. This was a huge, we can always do a whole show on this, but that was such a major transformation. Well, who got the oil? England didn't have oil. France didn't have oil. And let me put it this way. When World War I started, England had control over 5% of the world's oil. When World War I ended, they had control of 50%.
Wow.
That wasn't an accident.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that's why Israel, why the mad dogs who run Israel were put in Israel to be our mad dogs.
There are proxy, Ken, but it's like, and now on Twitter, I'm not on Twitter. Eric is, he's on there, and I hear about it on the podcast. There's all these people who think America is now controlled by Israel, and I think that's more of the blackmail stuff, because America and our CIA, I mean. But when you're talking about that milieu in the early '60s of the mob, the CIA, Israel, it's all one entity, in my opinion. But
remember the relationship of Angleton to Israel, right? It wouldn't be kosher for the CIA to be advising Israelis on how to bribe U.S. congressmen,
right?
Or to bribe and intimidate, although they probably do bribe, intimidate, and blackmail congressmen. But it's perfectly fine to have another party do it. So I have a feeling Angleton assisted the Israelis. I mean, we know Angleton assisted the Israelis in setting up the Mossad.
Absolutely, and the Shin Bet. He's part of he was close to Shin Bet, right? Yep.
Because they were a new country. They didn't have the experience, or they needed the help, and we gave it to him. And the movie Al Pacino, Miami, drug dealer, Scarface. Remember, this guy starts out as coincidentally, he escapes from Cuba. He's washing dishes.
He's in the camp. He's in that camp,
right? But then he gets a job. He's washing dishes. Then he gets a job and now he's going down to the docks and bringing the drugs in, and then he's a tool for the arch criminals, and he rises up the ranks because he's useful. And then he gets to the point where, oh my God, he's like starting to become a problem for everybody. So that's how I kind of view Israel. But I think at the end of the day, we want murderous thugs running Israel in case we ever need to turn them. Well, aren't we already turning them on the Syrians, on the Lebanese? And then they like a pool shot, we hit one bowl off another. They propagandized us to go to destroy Iraq. Didn't we want to destroy Iraq? Because here's a piece of little information. One of the biggest embassies, if not the biggest embassy in the world, is where? It's in Iraq, right? Why did we do that? What's the point? And there's another thing. Look this one up. There is a massive embassy being built by the United States, massive, completely oversized, being built in Lebanon by the United States.
Really?
Why? Like it's maybe literally staffed at 100 times the size that a country of that size should have.
Wow.
So what's really going on? I think what's really going on is we want to make sure we've got that oil nailed down, because we can't fight wars without that oil.
It's strategery.
Yeah, on a large scale.
As Bush said, it's strategery.
Yeah, on a large scale.
Wow. Well, we are at the hour and a half mark, and we want to be respectful of your time. Where can people support your work and find your book and find more information on you and your research and what you do?
Well, I'm not a guy with a social media channel. So I have a bookstore. It's called BrassCheckBooks.com. BrassCheck. I think that's what it's called. BrassCheck Books, and all my books are there. I wrote a lot of books about COVID. By the way,
the flu world order.
That's the only podcast that we've ever had taken down. We had on Mary Holland from Children's Health Defense.
Great Mary Holland. Oh, boy.
We did an amazing podcast with her, and that was taken down within 12 hours.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the only one that we've ever had taken down and totally scrubbed. And I didn't even get a chance to convert it to an audio form, and it was gone.
Yeah, we lost it.
Oh.
It was a great talk.
We were with Bobby and Rand Paul during the flu world order. We were very much in support of what they were doing, if that tells you anything.
Yeah. So was I. I was a contributor to the real Anthony Fauci, a contributor of research. Yeah.
Oh, I need to read. I still haven't read that book, man.
It's a monster, man.
If you can send me a signed copy, Ken, it's on my list.
It's a big one. It's a big one. And Bobby Kennedy III, he has a Fauci book out now too.
I saw that. The Confession of Anthony Fauci.
Yeah, something like that. You want to talk about another gangster?
Confessions of a Wuhan hitman.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, awesome. Well, hang out with us, Ken, after we end the stream. But I want to thank you for coming on, and I think you've contributed a lot to the research and in the ongoing conversations that are having in the research community, and which spills over to people who are looking for greater truth. So I think you're to be commended for your hard work and your research, and we really appreciate you.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I put all of Ken's information in this description, a link to his Amazon page where you can buy his books, his website. So check out all his work. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And to support this podcast, go to patreon.com/JackmanRadio. Become a patron and follow us on X at Jackman Radio, on Instagram at Jackman Radio. And please subscribe to this channel. We will see you again soon. Thanks for tuning in.